Okay, so last week we kind of gave the background. We try to we tried to look at this particular approach, the whole business of compassion, in the framework of the whole path, and tried to show that it's the most advanced level. Which, as I said last week, is always a surprise to us. We think of compassion as like the first point, but why it's advanced and why we talked about why it's courageous. When we understand the Buddhist approach, the Mahayana approach to what compassion is, it's profound because it includes everybody. And there's no basis for this unless we understand the first stages of practice. This is what we talked about. And this means in the first stages of practice, it's all about ourselves, working out what our suffering is and what its causes are. That's the Four Noble Truths. That's the basis for ourselves to want to deeply understand suffering the way Buddha describes it, which is far more subtle and nuanced than we would think. When we start to have understanding of suffering and want to get rid of it, that's the basis of our own practice, controlling our body, speech, and mind, living in vows, purifying every day, because we can't bear the thought of future suffering. Of course, all based on the view that our mind becomes from before and continues on afterwards. These are the hypotheses, if you like, in Buddhism. So we need to understand these points, so we can even consider what he's trying to tell us, So the thing is, we looked at how if we can even understand the word compassion is seeing someone else's suffering. And so you think, oh my goodness, I don't want them to suffer. So first of all, you have to understand what suffering is. So right there, you've got to get back to the Four Noble Truths, which you learn about in the earlier stages of practice. The Four Noble Truths, there is suffering, there are causes, you can get rid of it, and how to do it. Then when you know it for yourself, you can go, oh my God, look at us, we're all in the same boat. What can I do to help? So it's absolutely has to come after the understanding of suffering, your own suffering, its causes, your own practice. Otherwise, the compassion is too limited. There's the compassion we have now, like we talked, the compassion we have now, is based on a whole series of different hypotheses. The compassion we have now is only for innocent victims, which is usually a few animals and children. In other words, we'll only give compassion to somebody who deserves it. And as far as we're concerned, you deserve compassion if you're a nice person. I mean, really, we're very narrow in our view. It's a very self-centered view. But the Buddha's view, when we understand what suffering is and its causes, includes every single tiny sentient being, including all the wackos and the psychos and the psychopaths to the saints, It includes everybody, the ants and the dogs and the creatures and the animals we can't stand. I mean, even look at how we have compassion for some animals. Usually it's only the pets in our house. We'll kill the rats because we prefer our cat. We'll kill the fleas because we prefer our cat. So our compassion at the moment is, in other words, using the Buddha's view, our compassion is limited by attachment and delusions. And they are what we work on in the first stages of practice. They're what free our mind up, which bring, as I mentioned last week, the consequences of our own happiness. Then we can begin to see, oh my God, look at this. So what we try to do on the compassion wing, and as we enter into it, is that the main job is to continue to work on your mind. That never changes from here to Buddhahood. But the difference is the motivation. The difference is what causes you. So the first stages of practice, it's known as like the wisdom wing, which is junior school and high school, as I call it, first and second scopes of the Lam Rim. That's called the practice of the ethics or morality of restraint, of refraining from harming. The main emphasis there is to stop harming yourself, because everything you think and do and say produces your future experiences. So when we get into the compassion wing, we continue to work on our mind. There is no difference, but the emphasis is different. It's now, as I mentioned last week, to break down the barriers between self and other. So we develop this incredible empathy, incredible connectedness with others. And as we continue to grow in the compassion wing, I think I might have mentioned last week, when you start to read the Bodhisattva literature, or even you start to see examples in front of us, such as His Holiness, such as Lama Zopa Rinpoche, it's hard to imagine those levels of compassion to be sustained. We have compassion for some people, but we can see how tough it is, how difficult it is. And why it's difficult is only because we have delusions. So as you free yourself of delusions in the first level of practice, then you're just leaving the space for incredible love, incredible affection, incredible compassion to come. And of course, to levels that seem impossible to us, Like the levels of compassion that and we're going to go into some of the techniques. In our course notes, the last practice is this nice meditation that includes meditating on the 8 verses. We're going to go through those. They're the most dramatic level of this level of compassion. If we read those just, without any context, it looks like mental illness. It looks like insane when you hear the level of compassion of these bodhisattvas. You know, you wouldn't, when you hear about it, you think that's not possible. No, they're insane, or it's not possible. It's very fascinating, you know. But we also do hear it. I mean, like I was a Catholic, right? And I loved reading about the saints. I suppose other Christians, I don't know, do other Christians like the Catholics, like the saints? Because the other Christians don't have a method for having saints, do they? It's all the Catholics, isn't it? It's all those holy beings from the past. So I mean, and this is the same as in you know, if we're Buddhists, it's really inspiring, you know, to read about the life stories of these great beings. Because then you can read about it in the books and think that's not possible. Then you see a person in front of you, or you read the stories. Then it's encouraging, because you go, wow, if they can do it, so can I, you know. So the compassion wing, the final stages of practice of the path to enlightenment. You know, the very first level of practice, you control your body and speech, basically. You abide by the laws of karma, you control your body, control your speech, control your behavior, and you live in vows, you take refuge, you live in vows, which is really stupendous to increase your capacity to not harm and not lie and not kill, etc. And then you purify your karma. This is the first concern, the first level. Then you get to the deeper level, you start to look into your mind, you go to the next level, the second scope, the middle scope of practice, or high school as I call it. You really then become a Buddhist. You really then get in touch with your mind based on Buddhist psychology, understanding the mind in a very particular Buddhist way, in order to distinguish between the neuroses and the goodness. This is the crucial point about Buddhist psychology, which we don't talk about at all in our models of the mind. In modern psychology, we don't divide states of mind into negative and positive, because it sounds moralistic to us. We wouldn't like to sound like that. But this is a crucial thing to understand in Buddhist psychology, because that's your job of being a Buddhist. The actual job, this is all the way from here to Buddhahood, the actual job of being a Buddhist, it's compassion, but the job is, all the time what you're doing is distinguishing between the neuroses in your mind, which separate you from others, which cause you misery and cause you to harm others, and the virtues in your mind, which make you happy, cause you to benefit others. And then, you know, and we're trying to decrease and eventually get rid of the first lot and grow and perfect the second lot. That's the essence of being a Buddhist, all the way from here to Buddhahood. You're being your own therapist, but to an incredibly sophisticated degree, you know. So the compassion wing stages, there are two parts to it. The first one is the cultivation of bodhicitta. And as we know in the Lam-Rim, if we've studied the Lam-Rim a little bit, there are two main methods for this. One is called the 7-point mind training, or something like that, or the 6 causes and 1 effect, something like that, I think. And the other one's called like exchanging self for others. And that's the more radical one. So there's a method in Pavonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand that combines these two, and there are 11 little points. And so when you read them, just like bullet points, it seems kind of very sweet and very simple, but people would spend years in meditation accomplishing each of these 11, each one building upon the previous, each one more complicated, more difficult, each building up, there's a logic to them all, you know, they're not flatline, they're kind of hierarchical. Each one leads to the next. So I think we began last week talking about equanimity. I don't know, does anybody remember? I think we did, yeah. So equanimity, you know, is like, as I mentioned, and then we'll go into these a bit more and we'll talk about, yeah, we'll start looking into these 8 verses and look into this more radical approach of exchanging self for others, which also includes the whole approach of transforming problems into happiness, which is the way they state it. Or as Lama Zopa puts it, we have to learn to like problems like we like ice cream, which kind of we get the point. Oh my God, really? I mean, it's kind of shocking, you know? So this equanimity is really important to understand. It's not just on this, you know, often we hear these words and we think, oh, that sounds nice, you know, everyone's equal, blah, blah, blah. They're much more literal than that. They're much more precise than that. We've really got to understand each of these 11 points. It's very specific in its approach. So equanimity is crucial to understand because it's the very foundation upon which eventually the love, compassion, great compassion, and bodhicitta will be built. Without this equanimity, you can't get far. So equanimity, like I mentioned, you know, the way it's used in this part of the path, it's this heartfelt, when you've got it, this heartfelt recognition that enemies and friends and strangers are equal to each other from one point of view. That's it. Equal to each other from one point of view. They each want to be happy and don't want to suffer. And it sounds kind of, yeah, okay, all right, that sounds kind of interesting. Then, you know, but it's quite precise and quite not that easy. So we discussed it. So the fact it's the foundation, because what we're trying to see is we're trying to prove to ourselves that everybody wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. That's it. Everyone wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. So we're seeing it in the framework of the three categories of sentient beings in the world, which are the three categories of beings that we see through the lenses of the three delusions, the three poisons. The objects of attachment, we call them friends. The objects of aversion, we can call them enemies. You mightn't use that word, but it's good enough for this understanding. And the object of the third lot, like we talked last week, is strangers. So what for the people we're attached to, the friends, they're our beloved. So we do have love and compassion for them. And that's mainly where our love and compassion stays, for that group. That's it. But as Lama Zopa says, they're unstable. Because when the boyfriend gives me up for it, when Andrew gives me up for the younger version, like I said last week, my love and compassion turn off like a tap. And now he goes into the enemy category. And now he looks ugly to me. I can't stand his name. I sue him. I mean, look at the suffering that happens in broken relationships, you know. That's what an enemy is. So it's unstable. The love and compassion are not stable. We think the love and compassion we have is limitless for that beloved boy. It is not. And it sounds very brutal to us to hear this, but look at our experiences. When a person, even just a person at work, starts to be a bit mean to you, you stop liking them. You feel hurt and resentful and angry and upset, and you can't stand them. They've gone from friend to enemy. Why? What's the criterion for this? It's because they're no longer fulfilling my needs. I mean, when we hear it in this way, like I said last week, it's kind of brutal. It seems, are we that selfish? Well, I mean, yes, we are. But because we think it's normal, we don't think of it as selfish. Well, that's just normal, we'll say. And what we mean by normal is it'd be weird if you weren't like it. Well, Buddha's arguing with this. He's debating with these points. So right now, the basis of why I love Andrew is very simple. It's because he makes me happy, because he fulfills my needs. Basically, he does what my attachment wants. That's it. And why I don't want the enemy to be happy. I mean, I've got to even struggle to want the enemy. I've got to struggle to not want him to suffer. Look at us. And why I do have compassion. Why I don't have compassion for the enemy is simply because he doesn't make me happy. This is the logic of ego. Of course, it's not logic. And why I couldn't care less about the strangers is because they neither help me nor harm. So when we see this, it's so logical, it's so clear, it's so evident. And all we're trying to do is shift that logic, which is not logic, it's ego's logic. We're trying to in other words, the simple thing we're doing with equanimity is get yourself out of the equation. It's stop seeing people through your lenses of your own needs. But because this is so primordial, because we're all driven by the three poisons, including the monkeys and the ants, this is a view of the mind that Buddha doesn't just have for humans. It's the universal view of all minds in samsara. It's his analysis of all beings in the universe, which is kind of interesting. No modern psychology talks like that. We're all driven by this. So what he's trying to get us, this system is trying to get us to see that, get yourself out of the equation, Robina. Don't be so self-centered. Stop seeing people through the lenses of your needs. Just see them from their own point of view. As our mothers would say, put yourself in their shoes. But this point here is a very simple point, is to recognize, and this is really hard. You've got to strip away lots of assumptions. You've got to strip away all the attachment. You've got to strip away all the anger. You've got to strip away all the indifference to get to simply see that these three people, which is the entire universe, are equal to each other from one point of view. I mean, one might be a psychopath, one might be a saint. That's not the issue here. They're simply equal from one point of view, which is what we're trying to prove to ourselves. This is what equanimity is, that they each want to be happy and don't want to suffer. And that takes a long time to get to, because we say, but, but what do you mean they want to be happy? Who cares? Because now then our recognizing they want to be happy and don't want to suffer now becomes the basis of our wanting them to be happy, which is called love, and our wanting them not to suffer, which is called compassion. That's the point. Love is defined as may you be happy. Compassion is defined as may you not suffer. So right now they're based upon whether they make me happy. That's it. So that's the wrong basis. That's what equanimity is. And we grow love and compassion on top of that. And that necessarily will include every single sentient being. So of course we have to go slowly. I mean, my goodness, we're going to have to understand it first, understand the logic of it, and then attempt to practice it every day, So there's a whole series of these little techniques, and we'll just mention some of them.
But I want to get to the one that's mentioned in this text in the course notes. There's 8 verses, which is the more at the more advanced stages, where we really the most advanced stages. And you, by reading the text, which seem very simple, we will see that, you know. So after this first one, once you get equanimity, the next little technique that you'll then plug in, like the bullet points for each one. This next one is hilarious. It's like, I don't know if I mentioned, I think I didn't get to this one last week. We only started with equanimity. This next one, and you know, is that it's almost like you just need your calculator for this one. The thing to think about is all sentient beings have been my mother. Well, you know, if we in the West hear that, we think, are they trying to make us suffer? Because we think our mums are the cause of our suffering, not our happiness. So the idea here is, this coming from Asia, is, as His Holiness says, it's simply an example. A mother is an example of a person who takes care of people, who loves and nurtures and looks after and wipes your little bottom and ties your shoelaces and helps you when you're miserable, supposedly. But we all do know that we're a lot of neurotic mummies. You know, we'll join the universe. We're all neurotic, including our mums, but we tend to have a view, especially in the modern world, that because mother made us, we believe mummy made us, then we have this huge kind of assumption that she should be perfect. Why do you think we get so hurt if our mother's not nice? Because we think we shouldn't. We think she should be nice all the time. I don't know why we think it. It's just the hubris of attachment. It's like an incredible view. We assume our mother should be perfect. Well, Buddha says, no, you get the mother you deserve, baby. There's a strong karmic connection between you and your mum. Already by understanding karma, it shifts your view about who your mum is, you know. So here, it's a bit, this one is just more like it's like I said, you almost need your calculator for this one. Is that given that there are trillions of sentient beings, and given that all our minds are beginningless, then it follows logically we bumped into each other in countless lifetimes. I remember I mentioned this to a mathematician and he scoffed at it. I can't remember his logic, but it seems to be pretty logical. You have to have bumped into people countless times. I mean, it's a nutty idea to us when we all think we began in our mother's womb. But never mind. So the idea is we bump into each other countless times, whatever. So the next point is, the third one, is now there are 2 parts to this one, 3A and 3B, if you like. 3A is the mother one again. So the mother, the name of the meditation, and let's discuss it, is the mother is kind. So as His Holiness says, if you can't cope with the idea of your mother being kind, well, think of your father. Think of somebody who's taken care of you. That's enough. That's the whole idea, as an example of a person who's taken care of you. So anyway, we'll take the mother, but I think the mother's a good example no matter what. Even if your mum's a neurotic, even if your mum's an alcoholic, even if your mum gave you away at birth, you'll hear my point. So, okay, how is the mother kind? Well, I think a crucial point here is to look at this word kindness, you know. When we say a person's, think about this again, it's very self-centered, we should be embarrassed, but it's just how we take it for granted. When we say a person is kind, what we usually mean is they just did what we wanted. Think about this. It's just they just fulfill my attachment's needs. If I go to the cafe and order chocolate cake and she smiles at me and gives me an extra piece of cream, and a discount, of course I will say she's kind. You understand? I'll be so happy because I got what I want. And when you get what you want, you're very happy. When you get what attachment wants, you feel very excited and perky, you know? So you say, oh, you're so kind. Of course you will say that. But maybe she thinks you're a creep. Maybe she's talking about that fat Buddhist nun around your back, behind your back, talking to the chef. What an idiot she is. But I don't care. She gave me what I wanted. So as far as I'm concerned, she's kind. So that's a very limited view of kindness. That's why we think our mother isn't kind when she doesn't do what we want. That's why we want to kill her when we're 15, isn't it? Because how dare you do that to me? You're evil. You cause all my suffering, blah, blah, blah. Because she's not doing what we want. So that's not really what's meant here by kind, which is why we find it a struggle to understand. Here, the idea of a person being kind is simply the fact that they did anything at all for you. That's the point here. But we also, the other way we use kind, which is sort of okay, you know certain people who just have a kind aspect. Oh, she's just such a kind old lady, or he's such a nice man. He's got such a kind voice. Some people are like that. They've got the karma to have a really kind persona. That's not wrong. But here, the whole point is why we're trying to think the mother's kind is because even the few things that she has done that have basically supported your life, have facilitated your life, you know. I mean, usually a mother is the person who gives birth to you. So let's just think of those who weren't given away, but I'm going to discuss that one in a minute. So your mummy gave birth to you. Then she looked after you the whole time you're in the womb. Then you popped out and they took care of you. And then she had to wipe your little bottom and look after you when you cried and feed you. I mean, all I know is that if I had to look after somebody else's child because there's no attachment to them, it would make me insane. I mean, luckily I joke and say I'm glad my mother had attachment. She would have killed me otherwise. I can't imagine why mothers don't kill their babies. And I'm not being sarcastic. If you get away all the mythology of a mother, you know, what a mother is from the Buddha's view is a person with whom you have very strong karmic connection from the past. I mean, look at the connection. You run like a magnet and jump into their body. That's a pretty strong karmic connection. That's incredible. We have all this mythology about mothers, you know, and we can see that some mothers do not like their babies, do not have much attachment to them. That's why some mothers let their babies die or even kill them. They're not trying to be horrible. It's just how it is. So when our mother has attachment and then add some love to it, that's the classic mother. So, I mean, mothers do incredible. I see what mothers do. Unbelievable what they do for their children. Of course, it includes fathers too. Think about parents, you know. So we're trying to just simply see here the fact that she's done anything at all. Now, when I think of my mum, and she was, you know, used to get depressed and she had 7 children, and my father wasn't the best father in the world, always struggling to make money and difficult. And she sent us to the best Catholic convent. And I always joke that she still owes the bills about 60 years later, whatever. But I mean, I can say before, because she's my mother, I would demand and expect her to be doing those things because you have this incredible arrogance when you're little. It's her job, you know. And then I think of how hard she worked. I think of incredible, exhausted. She got a stroke at some point because of the stress of taking care of 7 children, paying all the bills, looking after a crazy husband. I mean, my darling daddy, I love him. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of work. I mean, I look at parents. I look at one of my sisters who's got 7 children, and now she's got about 27 grandchildren and a couple of great-grandchildren. And she's this matriarch of all these people and takes unbelievable care of all these human beings, tries to see them equally, never talks about them behind their back, looks after every single one of them. I can't believe it, you know. I look at this. I can't believe. I can't see how you can't think that's not kind. Thank you very much. Now, let's look at the mothers who are also look like they're not so kind. Like you might have a mother who's really possessive, full of attachment, manipulates you. I mean, that's really not an uncommon story. That's because of attachment. So, of course, when we've done the work in the lower scope, we understand attachment really well. So we know our mother. We know why she's like that using the Buddha's analysis. But it's harder for us to think, you know, to love her. We know that because we feel overwhelmed in her presence. She's always manipulating us and kind of possessive. That's all part of attachment. We understand it. So let's think, and let's say she's very selfish. Let's say she was very selfish or very depressed and couldn't take care, or she was an alcoholic and didn't do her job properly. That's definitely possible. So how do you think, how is she kind? We think this is not possible. Well, part of our problem, we because of delusions, if a person is totally gorgeous, some people adore their mothers and they seem to be perfect mothers. They utterly adore their mother. They can see no fault. Then other mothers who've got lots of faults, that child only sees their faults. And that's the problem with attachment and aversion. We swing between these two extremes. As long as my mother, I mean, I remember the moment my mother fell off the pedestal. It was really quite a shock to me. I remember the moment, the first time I found fault in my mother. It was like it was shocking to me. I remember the moment when I started to find fault. Up until then, my mother was like a saint. I would never have thought a bad word about her. I was totally attached to my mother. I remember it. I was like 12. I think these days you're about 3 when you start criticizing your mother, you know, more degenerate now. So then, and it was shocking to me to start to find fault. But of course, once you start, it's downhill from there. Within a year, she's your worst enemy. And then when you've got anger towards somebody, all you see is their faults. We really know this. So when we learn this earlier in the first and second scopes of practice, we see it coming here. So we know we haven't got a valid picture of our mother. We're just talking the mother here. So that's a good example. So our assumption of attachment is if she's got to do everything I want and got to be really perfect and behave beautifully and never be mean and never be depressed and never be an alcoholic, because we take it all personally. I mean, that's insane to expect a person to be like that just because she gave birth to us. But we do, you know. So the thing is to start changing our picture of our mother. To start, and this is a very simple practice. This is a simple method to do it. Just instead of this, as soon as you say mother and all this aversion arises or the fears arise, let's say for those of us who have that feeling, it's a really profound and simple exercise just to start to think of the simple things that she did for you. Now, I remember saying to one of my sisters when she just did something for me, I said, "Oh, you're so kind." She said, "What do you mean kind, Robina? It's just natural." That's not, we think that, but that's not the point here. We've got to point it out. So your mother gave birth to you. For that few months you're in her womb. That's an incredible thing to do for somebody. I mean, we take it for granted. Then she took care of you when you're little and you're crying and looked after you and fed you and educated you. And I mean, look at the constant attention a mother has to give to a child. I can't imagine how you can't say that's incredible kindness. All the more if my mother was depressed, it's much harder for her to have to do that for her 7 children. If you're feeling all perky and happy, it's easy to love people. So these are actions that she did. Don't take them for granted. Now, let's say your mother, even when she was an alcoholic and she did terribly bad things to you, I don't disagree. She did, but she still did some good things. But we forget them. So when you start to, it's like you're painting a new picture of your mum. At the moment, maybe you got a mum that you don't want to look at. She's neurotic, she's mean, she's whatever. So start painting a new picture. Start putting in the good things she's done. And remember from her point of view what it must have felt like. Then you're going to start painting a new picture, of your mum. You're going to start to see her in a different way. This is what we have to do. Then you will start to agree, yes, my mother, how kind, Now, what if your mother gave you away? That's the one reason on our planet for people to suffer terribly, the sense of abandonment, just sometimes for some children, some adults or old cannot get over that fact. The hurt, the pain they experience that their mother gave them away and I'm not denying that pain. It is very painful. But let's analyze that, please. Why is that mother kind? I'll tell you one reason you should never forget. She didn't abort you. This is not a joke. She didn't kill you. I'm not being rude. Some of us have had abortions, okay? I had an abortion. A person I know at the same time as when I was a kid, she, at the 60s, when she was 16 or 17, had a child. She refused to have an abortion. I don't know what her reasons were. She wasn't even going to mass. She was a Catholic, but she didn't want to kill the baby. And I'm trying to be rude or make you feel guilty if you did, because I did. And it's a good word. A kill is the right word, not put them down like we say for animals or put them to sleep, or abort, a nice medical term. It's called kill. With respect, I did. I had an abortion, crystal clear. The second I knew I was pregnant, and there's something interesting I want to talk about for a second. I don't know if I've done this before, but I want to do it. It's very interesting. The karma between me and that child, which is important to factor in. So anyway, so your mother didn't abort you. Now, in this particular person I'm thinking of, she was prepared to lose the boyfriend. She was 17 at the time of being a Catholic. She had bad reputation. She decided and then she gave the child away. So she suffered terribly for years because of this, the pain, the hurt, the loss. The mother, this person I know. And then at some point she made contact with the daughter. And the daughter couldn't stand her, gave her up again, And it was devastating for her because she felt, my mother gave me away. Why should I be nice to her? Well, she didn't kill her, but I bet she has never thought that once, ever once. She's never thought that. I remember one person told me years ago, this fellow, he's a German man, he told me that his mother only told him recently, and he's an adult now, that she was having an abortion. She was going to abort him. It was crystal clear. She's in the hospital. Everything's prepared. She's in a gown. She's getting ready to go into something or other. She's walking from one room to the next. She puts her hand on the doorknob and she makes a decision. I'm not going to have an abortion. She turned around and left. And she heard, it blew his mind. He could not, he felt like he'd won the lottery. He felt like someone had saved him from a car accident. When he realized it was just like that, he could have been killed, but he got a life instead. So I think these are the powerful points. I mean, with my abortion, I always like to think about it. And many women thank me for talking about it because people have a lot of burden, I think. And this is the way karma is. Karma is a very interdependent scenario. There was me. I was I don't want to be too gross, but in bed with this bloke. And that second I knew, I said to myself, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Many women tell me this. I don't know if you've heard this before. I remember a friend of mine, her daughter was staying in the house while their house was being fixed. She was with her husband, and the daughter came down for breakfast one morning and said, oh, Mum, I'm pregnant. And the mother said, oh, when did you find out? She said, oh, 45 minutes ago. She knew immediately, obviously with her husband, that she's getting pregnant. That's when the consciousness seems to enter into the egg and sperm. So in my case, there's this sentient being who died a few weeks before, coming from the intermediate state. I hop into bed with this boy, and due to past intense karma with me, her mind, this child, I don't know if it was male or female, ran like a magnet to the egg and sperm in my fallopian tube. And that second I knew she was there. And that second I said to myself, I'm going to have an abortion. So this is interesting because I never had a doubt about it. I never doubted it. That means the karma of that child, this is incidental now about kindness of mothers. I wasn't so kind. That child, that person, that sentient being had very strong karma. Number one, to come to my womb to get a human body. They won the lottery. But number two, they had the karma to be killed.
And there were no hindrances. I remember I was in London, it was 1968. The National Health had just approved free abortions. So I felt like, oh, aren't I lucky, you know? Aren't I lucky, I thought. Everything was completely smooth. So in other words, the karma of that person to be killed was so strong, there were no hindrances, you know? But their suffering was terrible because they didn't do the D&C properly and had to scrape out the poor little fetus a second time. It was very interesting. That's karma between me and that person. So anyway, in my case, I killed the baby because they had the karma to be killed. So in your case, you didn't have the karma to be killed, but you had the karma to be given away, because we don't think that in the West. We think, oh, the mother was evil. The mother was naughty. I'm this innocent victim. No, you created the cause by rejecting your mother 42 lives ago or whatever. That's how come she gave you away. But the point here I'm getting at is a logical reason to remember the kindness of your mother is she didn't kill you. It's like as if it's like as if someone saves you from a car accident. You will never forget that person as long as you live. Well, look at how you think of your mum. You've never thought that once. That's profound, you know. So thinking of the kindness of the mother. And then, of course, the logic being they've all been my mum, so they've all been kind. Now, so the 3B is a very interesting one. This seems even more abstract initially. And the bullet point here, the heading goes, all beings are kind. So what does that mean? Not evident at all. This means, and this is based on interdependence, that you think about it, since the time I was born, since the time I was conceived, every tiny good thing that has ever happened, or everything that has happened in my life that's good, everything that's facilitated my life since the time of conception, is the handiwork of sentient beings. Think about it. I mean, think even of my little body. My mother started eating food. Then it went into her body and it turned into my body. It turned into my body. My mind went there, but her food, the food she ate, so she probably ate meat at the time, the chickens and the cows and the bulls and the fishes, they turn into my body. So when that little body comes out, I came out after 7 months apparently, that little body of mine, what was it? Who constructed my body? We say, oh, this is my body. Excuse me, don't be so arrogant. It's a mountain of fishes and cows and chickens. Think about it. Somebody literally put some flesh of animals and it turned into my body. That's what food is. Well, all those kind of animals. But for them, I would not have a body. But for my mother's milk and all the food in her body, all the carrots and the tomatoes, which when they were picked, killed lots of creatures. Then you come out of the body and she feeds you and the nurses take care of you. And they put a little, the Mercy Hospital where I got born, they probably put a little woolen blanket around me to keep me cozy. Well, that's kind sheep. Thank you, sheep. Everything since we are born, my glasses, my clothing, every single tiny thing, everything I ever use, every computer, every lamp, the floor of the house, the heating, the roof, the lights, everything we have ever used since the time we were born is the handiwork of sentient beings. So if we can't hear, that is unbelievable. It's profound, but it's completely evident. This is scientific fact. But why do we never notice it? Why, in other words, why do we take it for granted? Because it is the hubris of attachment, this self-cherishing that assumes I deserve it, especially if I pay for it. So we never think of it. We just see it in a different way. In other words, at the moment, having delusions, having attachment, and having this self-cherishing, I don't think I mentioned this last week. This is a really crucial point to understand. I'll discuss it in a second. We see everything and everybody through the lenses of my needs. And if my needs are satisfied, I'm prepared to say thank you. If they're not, I'll be angry. And the rest, we don't care. We can see how we construct all these. So what we're trying to do is remove these misconceptions from our mind and see things from the point of view of others, It's very this is logical. This is scientific. No one can argue with this. But what we could argue with is, what do you mean with they're kind? We'll just say it's their job because we take it for granted. So taking something for granted is very arrogant because you just think, oh, that's just how it is, This is profound. This is incredible, this thinking, People do these people do retreats on these points for years until eventually they've made that paradigm shift in their mind and have actually achieved bodhicitta, So the next series of little techniques, the fourth one is the conclusion. I must repay their kindness. This becomes your energy to want to continue to be a Buddha so you can repay the kindness of all these sentient beings,
So the next series of techniques up to the bodhicitta one are now where we start to make this shift from cherishing ourself first, putting self first, to cherishing others. And these gradual little techniques gradually make this shift gradually. So let's look at this term self-cherishing. I think I didn't discuss it last week. So as we know, if we look into the, the teachings, we learn about the mind, we always hear about the delusions, and the delusion, the main one is attachment. And attachment is this bottomless pit of emotional hunger to get what I want, essentially. That is effectively, as far as the Four Noble Truths is concerned, that effectively is the main cause of suffering in our daily lives. It gives rise to anger and all the other dramas. Now here, though, it's framed differently in the Mahayana path. And that it's now the main enemy that we're trying to conquer on the Mahayana path is what we simply would call selfishness, putting me first. Well, Tibetans have this very sweet term for it. It sounds nice, self-cherishing. This means selfish. Put self first. Now, we don't like we can all joke, oh, I've got so much attachment. Oh, God, I'm so attached to chocolate cake. We'll laugh, But to be accused of being selfish, that's very painful. So selfishness, attachment is in relation to everything, cakes, everything. So self-cherishing or selfishness is directly in relation to others. And it's framing attachment differently. Or you could argue that attachment is already implied there because of attachment, to get what I want, we put me first. So that's the main enemy here. Why? Because what we're trying to do, as I said before, gradually through these 11 techniques is make that paradigm shift where eventually we have literally now only think of others. We've now totally cherish only others. And again, even these simple words are so hard for us to hear. It just seems, you'd be accused of being really kind of mentally ill and a bit demented if you thought you had to cherish everybody more than you. Which is why these 8 verses that we're going to get into are quite shocking if you analyze the words, It's hard for us to recognize. It's hard for us to see this as normal. We would think a person's mentally ill if they did this, because it's not how we in the world, in modern psychology and in neuroscience, we factor in self-cherishing. We factor in selfishness as a normal part of a normal person. So Buddha's just more radical, I'd say, in his presentation of just what we are capable of, So self-cherishing is the enemy. So from these points now up to the 11th one, we're making this shift, gradually learning to give up cherishing others, cherishing self, to want to cherish others. So the thing here is, again, this is the point I was making last week, and I want to keep making it, to have to remember that this is advanced practices. These are advanced practices. Because if you hear this, we can hear it's not normal behavior. It's not normal. And the fact is, as Pabonka Rinpoche says in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, to do these level of practices, especially the ones exchanging self for others, you need to be a suitable vessel. And what that means is you need to have done the earlier parts of the work. The wisdom wing, control your body, control your speech, live in vows, do lots of purification, become your own therapist, understand your mind, go deeply into mind, look at attachment, look at anger, look at jealousy, own responsibility for who you are. That's all the first stages of practice. That's a suitable vessel. Because if you leap into these compassion teachings and you read some of these verses that I want to go through on page 59 in your course notes, but we wouldn't go through them, you won't understand them. You'll think this is insane, So the other thing I wanted to mention here, I might have mentioned it last week. What we're trying to, the essence of all of the positive qualities are love and compassion. Even they summarize it down to compassion. That's why they call it the compassion wing. Excuse me. Hang on a sec. But there's another level of compassion that's called great compassion, Mahakaruna in Sanskrit. It's not just a nice feeling, it's a technical term. And that even leads to, I'm a bit confused how Lama Zopa uses this, but there's the one that he calls the special attitude. And I think it's kind of another way of putting this one. This is really huge to understand and necessary to understand. It's the unique characteristic of the Bodhisattva path, of the compassion of the Bodhisattva path. So as we know, you've got these different stages of practice. And if we look into the Buddhism that's taught in the world, and if you go to Burma or Thailand, you'll learn Theravadan Buddhism. So often that's called Hinayana. Then you have the Mahayana. So Theravada is one of the only remaining of the 18 sub-schools of all the different sort of tenets of Buddhism that were existing way back in India at the time, you know. And so generally it's just known as Theravada because there's many different viewpoints in the Hinayana and the Mahayana, many different viewpoints. And when you study Buddhist philosophy more intensively, you study a text called Buddha's Tenets, and you go through all these different viewpoints, the variations of Buddha's interpretations and the people's interpretations of Buddha's teachings about different things. So one crucial difference in the Theravada teachings is that the main goal for most people, the main goal is to achieve your own nirvana, your own cessation of suffering and its causes. So if you take the Lam Rim, the wisdom wing is that. You'd or junior school and high school, or this first and the lowest and middle scopes. Basically, that's the Hinayana teachings. That's what you'd hear in the teachings in Burma or Thailand. But there, you would graduate there, basically put it like that. So you'd control your body, live in vows, purify the mind, go to the next level, work on your mind, purify your speech, purify your mind, abide by the laws of karma. Then you go to the middle scope, you become your own therapist, you get single point of concentration. You then start to realize emptiness, because emptiness is a Theravada teaching. It's not a Mahayana teaching in its nature. There are interpretations of it that are Mahayana for sure. So then you'd eventually realize emptiness, and then one life or another. After that, you finally, in that particular life, you will achieve your own nirvana, your own liberation from suffering. And this has been your goal for countless lives, to get out of samsara. And then when you die that particular life, you won't come back. Now let's analyze how you'd be, what kind of person you'd be. You'd be unbelievable. You have given up ego grasping. There's no longer any sense of an inherent me. You've got no attachment, no anger, no jealousy, no neuroses. You've finished your neuroses. So what have you got left? If you've got no neuroses left, what have you got left? You've got infinite love, infinite compassion. Of course you have. How could you not have? It's your natural state. How could you not be incredibly compassionate? You'd have incredible powers. You'd be clairvoyant. You'd be an amazing being. It's stupendous. But the point is this. Because your goal for life after life after life is to get out of samsara, to graduate there. Not, they do posit the Mahayana path. They posit that there is a bodhisattva path. But they say most people's accomplishment is potential is to achieve liberation, your nirvana. So if you're on that path, your goal is to get out of samsara. That's your constant motivation. You want to get the hell out of samsara. You get renunciation, you realize emptiness, and you quit. But so what have you got? You've got lots of love, lots of compassion, lots of goodness, no question. Now, what happens in the particular life that you finally have finished the job, then at the time, because your goal has been, I must get out of samsara. And second, the bliss you experience, because when you've achieved liberation, when you've even just got shamatha, not to mention realize emptiness, your mind is radiantly blissful. It's our natural state, You're joyful, you're blissful, and you've got incredible love and compassion. But when you die, your compassion and your love are overridden by your bliss and by your goal to get out of samsara, and that means you won't come back. Now, if you're on the Mahayana path, your goal is you're going to go to university level, you want to go to the Mahayana path, you want to go to the Bodhisattva path, you want to become a Buddha. So you got the same stages of development, you could argue, but you added to your regular compassion, great compassion. And so compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering, that's unbearable, I wish they didn't suffer. Great compassion, which you have to cultivate, is what can I do to help? What can I do to fix it? In other words, it's this brave, courageous attitude of the bodhisattva that it's my job. It's like the job description of a bodhisattva, and that can't have to be cultivated. So that's great compassion. And so for the bodhisattva, they might even have done all the same stages and even don't have to return, don't have to come back. But when they die, their great compassion overrides their bliss, and they keep coming back until they continue on the Mahayana path to become a Buddha. So great compassion is this huge extra level of compassion that's unique to the Bodhisattva path. This sense of personal responsibility, or as Holiness will sometimes call it, universal responsibility. It's my job. It's a bit like the mother, I'm sure I mentioned this example. We know a mother's job description, she'll never forget. She'll see a baby there, unless she's got Alzheimer's, she'll go, oh, who's going to take care of that person over there? She knows it's her job, baby. She'll jump in the river, even if she can't swim, because she knows it's her job. Mother, father, same thing, That's great compassion. It's my job. You know, Wolfgang's got 4 children, 6 children, 12, whatever he's got, his little boys. He doesn't forget that he's the father. He knows it's his job. That's a really simple way to put it. You know it's your job description. That's a bodhisattva. They know it's their job. And when they finally get bodhicitta, which we're getting to, every single sentient being they meet, it'll be like as if they're the mother, the father. They know it's their job. No one has to tell them. It's their job description. That's the expression of great compassion. What can I do to help? That makes all the difference, you know. That's profound. And that's why courageous. That's courageous. Because the attitude of that bodhisattva is to never give up. Never give up, you know. Incredible optimism, incredible determination. So you go through these next few stages there. I'm going to leap over them. You know, the next one, you eventually get using all logic to argue with ego's view that you're more important. You get to first think about how other sentient beings are equal to me. It's like the equanimity one, but instead of thinking that they're equal to each other, you now think that all sentient beings are equal to me. They all want to be happy and don't want to suffer. Then you get to the point of thinking, well, now slowly moving towards thinking they're more important than me. And this sounds so bizarre to us. What do you mean they're more important than me? I mean, I say those words now. I understand the logic and the teachings, but I say others are more important than me. Think about this. Say the words. I don't understand it. This is how deep ego grasping is. This is how deep self-cherishing is. What do you mean they're more important than me? It just doesn't make those words that make no sense. Do they not? I mean, if you understand that they do, then you're a pretty high being, I tell you. I hear it. I know I've got to aim for it. I try to act like it, but it's because ego grasping, the root delusion is the delusion in the mind that already has posited a separate me. This is what literally it has created, a feeling of this separate, concrete, real me, and others are all out there, and they're not me. And we all know the automatic response of most people when it's in a difficult situation is it's going to be I. But of course, we assume that is normal. Buddha says, yes, it's normal insofar as we've all got it, but we can conquer it. We can go beyond it. But it seems hard to think, why should I, you know? Even as I say the words, others are more important than me. It's just like too weird, you know? And this is where in these meditations, we've got to use logic to argue with ego's insane misconceptions. You know, when we think of meditations on compassion, it sounds like all gooey and lovely. No way. Delusions are manipulative liars in the mind. We believe their stories for so long. So we've got to use very keen logic to argue with them. And eventually when people actually accomplish this, I mean, I always tell the story about Harry. I'll tell the story eventually when I come. There's a friend of ours called Harry. I've told the story many times, so some of you might have heard it. So I'll describe that later. But when you read stories, I mean, even just ordinary people, we hear about this, you know, in disasters. Like I always think of those 2 big buildings in New York when they got bombed, you know, those airplanes went into them. And you hear about the people who are running up the stairs to help people while people are running down the stairs to escape. There are people always like this, ordinary people in ordinary life, you know, putting other people first. You hear people talk this way. It's so moving. It's incredible. So we know it's possible. But here we're trying to talk about perfecting this to the point where it actually becomes your logic that is immovable in your mind, that you've got to the point where you know you have such love and compassion for others that truly others are more important. See, people like the Dalai Lama I find so fascinating. It seems to me because his position in the world, he's a world leader. So he's found this, it seems my way of putting it, he's got this way of just presenting himself as a very ordinary person, hasn't he? He doesn't go on about things. He just looks like funny and ordinary, very charismatic, very powerful. He talks at a very normal level. He goes to bed at a normal time. He doesn't act like an unusual person at all. So what I'm meaning is, but everybody can see. Everyone, I remember 2 times. One time in 96, in 1990, no, in 82 first, in 1982, Lama Yeshe and FPMT invited, with some other centers as well, invited His Holiness to Europe. It was one of his, like about the 3rd visit to Europe, I think. I forget. He went in the late 70s first. And I happened to know about it because Lama was so wonderful. He had to come to several of our centers, and there were many people coming, and so Lama Yeshe appointed 10 of us to be security guards for His Holiness. And Lama being so wonderful, he appointed 5 men and 5 women. And I was one of them, of course. I thought I'd won the lottery. It was so amazing, you know. So we traveled with His Holiness for a couple of months. And what I noticed, this is the thing, up close and personal, you notice how he's very funny and ordinary and cracks jokes and just ordinary. But everybody just adores him. I mean, he's just, it doesn't look like he's so specially he's almost kind of wrathful. He's very powerful. But observing the security guards. I remember in Italy, when he came to Italy, Lama Yeshe invited him to give special initiations at a big center in Italy, near Pisa, Institute Lama Tsongkhapa. And there were like 700 people there. We had a big talk in a big tent in the garden. And His Holiness, and he was staying in this little house there. And because we had this job to be like His Holiness's guards, I mean, it was like a joke, you know, but he was so kind to us. But the real guards were there, these Italians from the drug squad, I think, in Pisa. They were appointed by the local government to come and take care of the Dalai Lama. So these sort of 27, 25-year-old arrogant looking young fellows, you know, first of all, never seen Buddhists before. I mean, they saw this Dalai Lama and I wasn't looking like a nun. Lama Yeshe made me wear lay clothes. It was very funny. He made it, well, 3 of us nuns being security guards, but he made us wear lay clothes. So I had these nice maroon boots and I wore lipstick and everything. I had hair. Lama Yeshe to look at me and laugh and say, I think I like you better like that, he'd say. Anyway, we would hang around the Dalai Lama, doing our job. And then I'd observe these 2 terrorist squads, you know, these 2 young guys. And in the beginning, for the 10 days that he was there, they just kind of looked at him. Yeah, okay. But he'd every now and then walk past him, he'd slap him on the back, he'd sort of crack a joke. And by the 10 days was finished, he had them in the palm of his hand. They thought he was divine, you know, but you couldn't see what he did. He didn't do that much to seduce them. But everybody who saw him, it was so evident. People in tears. I remember this in Spain where always double the number of people came to all these talks, and all these middle-aged. I remember this nice this nice Spanish lady with her handbag and her gloves, moved by him, in tears, people in tears. I was always amazed by it, because you could think, what's he making them cry for? There's something about him. Well, that's what kind people make people feel. So even though when you think of a kind person or a humble person, you think of a little soft person, you know, he's big and powerful and charismatic. But everybody who ever met him, and again in '96, we did a special issue of Mandala magazine when I was editing it, when he was in Australia for a couple of months. We invited him to do Kala Chakra, and I interviewed like 50 people who'd been involved, the police, the guards, the media. Every single person had something similar to say. They were so moved by this person, you know, his kindness, and yet he looked like ordinary. So, I mean, this is the thing about, this is the quality, this is the result. This is what bodhisattvas make people feel like. The person I'm talking about here, I'll talk about a story later about Harry, a meditator, an American. He's sort of this, some people might know him, he's this fat, jolly fellow with a big beard. He looks like Father Christmas, like Santa Claus, you know, but everybody adores Harry. Everybody who's ever met Harry will all tell you that they feel like they're Harry's best friend, because Harry's just this. In other words, so if you can imagine, this is the proof of the pudding. When you read the text, no attachment, no jealousy, only compassion, putting other people first, it sounds intense. But when you look at examples of people, then they just look like nice people, kind, and everybody adores them. Because, you know, I mean, because there's no ego there. So there's nothing in the way. So when they're with you, they totally adore you. They do adore you. And you think they're your best friend, you know, and that you're their best friend. That's how everybody thought about His Holiness. It was incredible. That's because there's no delusions there. So they're like the proof of the pudding. It's very fascinating. So anyway, you gradually get this, you know, finally you get the technique that is the culmination, that is the one that kind of kicks into bodhicitta. That's this technique, and it's mentioned in these 8 verses. So we'll go through the 8 verses now. It's called Tonglen, where you finally make that paradigm shift. And this is a meditation technique based on the success of the previous techniques, all the way from equanimity. And that's all based upon the wisdom wing techniques, that, you know, you do this meditation. This is an attitude you're trying to cultivate, but it can be done formally in a meditation. And for some reason, Western people love this meditation, even though it's so outrageous. You visualize a person who's suffering, and people do years of retreat in taking all the different realms of existence, all the animals, all the dogs, all the hell realms, all the pedophiles, and they learn to do this meditation. When you basically use your breath, you see a person suffering, a particular person, you take a particular person, think of a person even now. And then when you breathe in, you imagine breathing in to yourself, taking upon yourself their suffering. So what you're doing is really taking it away from them. And the attitude you're trying to cultivate is, I would rather have the suffering than them. I think parents have that. Wolfgang, do you have that for your sons? I bet you do.
Yes, of course.
There you go. You see? Right. He's just proving it. That's exactly the point. That's what we're trying to do for every sentient being. And that's difficult, of course. Wolfgang does not have it. He says he can't even have equanimity. I understand. He's been very accurate. We all like that. That's exactly what the view is. Because it's by this point, you've ripped away so much delusion, so much self-cherishing, so much anger and attachment. And when you've ripped all that away, all you're doing is seeing the truth that there's a living being in front of you whom you adore, whom you have affection for, whom you only want not to suffer, who you only want not to suffer. So then you do this meditation. So the point about this meditation is, it's number one, it is not a healing technique. It is not a method to heal the person of a headache. Number two, you're not trying to get a headache. That's hilarious. That's absurd to think that. I'm breathing in a headache. Then you feel disappointed because you don't get a headache. That's ridiculous. What it is you're using this person in front of you with suffering. You're growing this brave attitude that you have so much compassion for them. Not only do you have compassion, oh my God, look at that suffering. Not only do you have great compassion, what can I do to help? But you know what? The third one, Tonglen, you know what, honey? I would rather have the headache. Let me have the headache and you can be free of suffering and have happiness. That's the attitude. It's a powerful, outrageous attitude that we cultivate. And you can do it in meditation with anybody you like, you know. And so it's not to heal a person. It's not to get the suffering, but it's this brave attitude of thinking, if I could have the suffering, I would rather have it than them. I would rather they be free of suffering. So the taking upon yourself of their suffering, and there's different ways you do this, but one way, you know, you visualize like all yourself cherishing like a little rock at your heart. And when you breathe in this yucky smoke, imagining taking off their suffering, and you breathe it in and kind of imagine it smashes your self-cherishing. You can be creative about it. And then when you breathe out, that's the practice of compassion, taking away their suffering. And this one is giving happiness, which is meaning love. So then when you breathe out, blissful, radiant light, you breathe out, you give them your health, your wealth, your merit, your whatever you want to give, you know. So this is very detailed. You can do it very extensively. People do retreats on this, you know. To, of course, the point where it becomes real. That's the point, you know. So in other words, the love and compassion are like limitless. There's no longer any, you know, there's no longer this feeling of I holding back. That's why you've got to be a suitable vessel. Because if you're still a person who's got lots of self-cherishing and a lot of attachment, a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, a lot of jealousy, a lot of low self-esteem, this is not a practice for you. No way. These techniques that were really first cultivated in Tibet by the students of Atisha, who got these from his great teachers in India, they were kept secret in the beginning. They were secret. They were only made public eventually by Don Trompa, the disciple of Atisha in the 11th century, you know. So why don't we look at this little text? We'll go through it. So you can just listen. You don't have to look now. You can just listen to me. It's there. You've got it in your course notes, though. It's the last chapter. It's combined with a meditation. We won't do the meditation. I'll just go through the verses. And they're deceptively simple, these verses. They're kind of ridiculously simple. They're kind of cute. And that's why you see it's so interesting. When we think of advanced teachings in Buddhism, we think of emptiness. You've got to squeeze your brain. Sounds so complicated. But we would never think these simple words are difficult. But, you know, for me, bodhicitta seems to me much more difficult. I can handle emptiness any day. I'm not saying I understand it, but I find it manageable. Bodhicitta is outrageous, you know. Just really think about it carefully. Because it attacks yourself, it attacks what's in there, you know, this instinct of being me. So powerful. So the first verse, these verses are so simple. They're so cute. But let's analyze them and look at how outrageous they are, you know, really quite shocking, these verses. I have a panic attack when I read them, I tell you. Let me get my screen organized. Then we'll have some questions. Okay, the first one. Huh? What happened?
Nothing happened. Okay.
But did
Okay.
you ask for questions or not? Not
No,
yet.
not yet, Charlotte. Later. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Good, darling. Thank you. I'll read a couple of these verses, then we can have some questions. Okay, good. So now, this first one, I've got to really explain it. It says, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings. That sounds very peculiar. Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from sentient beings. You kind of tend to think it should be for sentient beings, but there's a very particular meaning here. There's a very particular meaning. So let me use the example. Let's say, Wolfgang is becoming a doctor. And why is a doctor? He has compassion. He wants to help people. So obviously, think about this, if he wants to become the best doctor most quickly because he's driven by compassion, because he sees so much suffering, and this is just the analogy of a bodhisattva, he's really driven by this compassion. So he knows his hands are tied right now because he doesn't have any skills. Let's say people with all these diabetes or something, and he doesn't know, he hasn't got the skill to heal them. Or he's a surgeon and he sees all these people's broken legs and he can't help them. So he's driven by compassion. This is a bodhisattva. And he's determined to become the best doctor on the planet. And of course, as quickly as possible. Now think about this. What does he need in order to do that? He needs lots and lots of suffering people. He just won't go and put his little kind of sign up, I'm a doctor, and then dispense a few Band-Aids and close the door at 5 o'clock. He will become 1,000 years it'll take him to become a good doctor. He will go to become a doctor sans frontières, what do you call that one? Without frontiers. He'd go to the worst scenarios. He'd go to where all the war zones are, and he'd pull his sleeves up and go in there, and he'd jump in the deep end and really, in other words, he's forcing his skills to the limit, becoming the best surgeon quickly in the most intense experience. So bodhisattvas need suffering sentient beings badly. Get the point. Of course they do. If you never meet a suffering sentient being, if he never met a person who's got broken legs and diabetes, how can he develop his skills as a doctor? Not possible. So in that sense, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit for me to become a Buddha as quickly as possible from all these suffering beings. Then the next line is ridiculous. All sentient beings who are more precious to me. There's a thing called a wish-fulfilling jewel. It's very ancient. I don't think such a thing exists anymore. This is from the ancient past history. And the idea of a wish-fulfilling jewel is something that it's like sort of $10 billion. So if you read the line here, all sentient beings who are more precious than even $1 million, you immediately go, what are you talking about? It's really hard to even hear these words properly. I mean, he would say that for his children. His 4 children, no question, they are more precious to him than $1 million. If he had to choose between $1 million and his 4 children, there's no question. He would say, so that's exactly the meaning. Because it's his job, he loves them, he has compassion, it's his job to help them. That's what we're trying to cultivate, this outrageous view to be this amazing being who feels this way about every single sentient being. This is the starting point. Determined to make the most out of all these suffering beings who are more precious to me than $1 million, I'm going to hold them most dear at all times. I mean, just those 3 lines, you've got to really think them through, because underneath what's informing those is insane, It's too huge. It's nice to read it superficially. Makes you go, oh, isn't that lovely? Love all sentient beings. I want all sentient beings to be happy. We say it, but it just goes in one ear and out the other. It's outrageous when you think about the meaning. That's the first verse. Now, the second one, I always joke about this verse, and I'd say, if your therapist advised you to do this, you could sue them. In fact, all the verses, you'd sue your therapist. I'm not joking. You know what I'm saying? And this needs so much context. This is why you've got to be a suitable vessel. You've got to have done the earlier work to be prepared to even hear these words properly and even try to practice them. When you're with others, and that's, these days it's with our family mostly, but in normal world, it's on the bus, on the train, on the freeway, at work. When you're with others, I will always consider myself the lowest of all. Now, just let's look at that line first.
This for us is so shocking, we can't even hear it. I mean, you would sue your therapist if she said, go home, Robina, and see yourself as the lowest of all. But we will say, taking these words as we hear them, literally, we will say, excuse me, mate, I already do that. Are you trying to rub my nose in it? Because the way we are now, if we're not a suitable vessel, that means we're a normal person who's got lots of self-pity, lots of depression, lots of anxiety, lots of anger, who feels hurt, feels no one loves them, people are unkind to them. You know, that's how we feel. That's the way ego is. So we feel we are low. That's what we call self-loathing, low self-esteem. So this, if we are still at that level, this is not our practice. I'm sorry. It's like 12th grade physics if you're only just beginning in junior school. You can't even hear the words properly. It's not possible to hear those words properly. Consider yourself the lowest of all. It's too heavy for our minds, you know. So what does it mean? Why would you want to do that? Because the whole point, the theme running through this entire level of practice is we are trying to smash the view in the mind that we have because of attachment, which in turn we have because we have ego grasping, which posits a separate me in the first place. We are trying to conquer the natural instinct to put me first, to see me as up. Now, if we have self-loathing now, low self-esteem, now for us, it's actually, and it's very embarrassing to hear this, it's the flip side of pride. You think of pride, we don't like to admit to pride. We love to admit to low self-esteem, but actually they're symptoms of the same problem. They're all based on a separate sense of poor me. And then when you've got low self-esteem, think about this. When we have low self-esteem, we look at the rest of the world and we're like, it's like we're offended when other people are better than us. How dare they be better than me? We're not happy if we see a person who's higher than me. We're not happy if we see a person more happy, more beautiful, more rich. We get jealous, we get resentful. But that's a hideous state of mind. But we would never think it is like that. We just think it's normal. So low self-esteem is a view that you only get when you see other people who are better. And then we resent them being better because we would rather be high. We don't like to think of it this way. Now, the thing is, if we had humility, if you've got low self-esteem, you'd have arrogance. It's like, it's rooted in arrogance, actually. It's very embarrassing to hear this. But if you've got humility, you would have self-confidence, because humility is content with who you are. We conflate low self-esteem and humility, don't we? They're completely different states of mind. The key characteristic of all the neuroses is that they're I-based, they're fear-based, they're not happy. But the key characteristic of all virtues is they're not I-based, they're spacious, they're appropriate, they're easygoing. It's a huge difference. So low self-esteem, we don't mind admitting to that. We feel sorry for people with low self-esteem, but we never feel sorry for people who've got high self-esteem, arrogance. We think, who do they think they are, these smarty pants, you know? So low self-esteem and arrogance are very connected. Humility is you're content with who you are. Really, it's profound. And that means you would have self-confidence. You'd be happy, you'd be good at what you are, and you'd be content, and you'd be delighted if other people are better than you. But if you've got low self-esteem, you'd have arrogance, and you can't stand the thought of meeting a person who's better than you because you feel you take it personally. This is how ego is, you know. So this is a distinction all the time in Buddhist psychology. So important to understand. So why then, at this level of trying to smash delusions and smash self-cherishing, would I want to, when I'm with others, see myself as well? And then the next line comes, it's even more shocking. And from the depths of my heart, hold others as dear and supreme. So I think these words are hard for us to hear. So let's say them in words we would understand. You know, what we're trying to do here is see the good qualities in other people and delight so much in them and see the value in those human beings and think how precious they are, like Wolfgang does for his 4 sons. It's automatic for him. So lowest of all means, it seems heavy for us, but what it means is putting them first. seeing them as more important. So he would, if he's a good father, he would have his meal after the children. He'd put them to bed first. He'd take care of them first. Nobody would criticize him for that. But that's what this is meaning. Putting other people first and putting yourself second. But these words are heavy for us. Low, supreme. We don't talk like this in our culture. But when we understand the meaning, it begins to make sense. So we can see if you're not naturally like that, it's an enormous practice. When you go to a party, when you go to a group of people at work, a meeting, because we're also self-conscious, we're all worried about what other people think about us, then of course we can't even see other people properly, you know. But here when you've really, and this is why people like love Harry, this fellow, or love His Holiness. You know, Harry's this kind of person. When you're with him, everybody, he chats away. He's very chatty. He's very funny. He's very kind. You always see him. You notice him. He's sweeping the floor. You notice at the teachings, he always sits in the back row, but he doesn't look like he's humble. He doesn't look like he's, oh, I'm a humble person. Look at me, looking all low and pathetic. He's always jolly and happy. But it's natural for him to put other people first. You feel like you're important when you're with him. That's the meaning here. So it says here, you know, all people, but you know, start with one. You've got to be realistic in this practice. So I think a way to practice this when you're at work, let's say, or if you're among your family, or maybe your auntie's there, especially a person you just don't like much. The best way to practice this, really clear, is you look at that person, even in your own mind, you think of it, and you think of one thing that person can do better than you. Not just, oh, they're really nicer than me. No, be precise. And I mean, you know, they might even have better. I remember when I did Kung Fu, when I was a Buddhist nun, I did Kung Fu in London. No one knew I was a Buddhist nun because I wore lay clothes. I had hair then. So I remember, it sounds very silly to say, but I'm confessing here. I think I've got very good karate feet, very good Kung Fu. I've got short, fat feet. My toes are quite short and equal, and I can do really good kicks. You know, I was very arrogant about my feet, and I'm really serious here, people. Just my feet. Now I would notice, so then I remember I'd look at, because when you do karate, you've got naked feet, right? So I'm always comparing feet. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we all do this all the time. We compare noses and ears, especially when we were children. I remember the girls at school who had prettier legs and their hair was nicer. I'd be so hurt by it, you know? We're always comparing bits and pieces. Depending on what, maybe if you're a tech guy, you might know someone else is better at this one than you know? So the thing is, I remember this girl at Paulette at karate, Kung Fu. She had really ugly feet, but she was much better at Kung Fu than me. So all I had to do was just praise her being good at Kung Fu, better than me, you know. That was very simple. That's how you practice it. So a person you don't like, you might be your ugly old auntie who you just see a picture of ugly. Think of something that she does that's better than you. That's how you practice this. Slowly, slowly chip away, you know. Very powerful. Lowest of all and supreme, heavy, I agree. But precious. Somebody important. You want to take care of them, you know, put them first. And we would do that even with guests. When a guest comes, you feed your guests first. It's like that. But that's what we try to do all the time. That's the point. Now, the next one, this is kind of more like, anyway, it says vigilant, and that's a particular meaning in Buddhist psychology. It means there's part of your mind that watches like a hawk everything that's going on. Dalai Lama calls it a policeman. The moment a delusion appears in my mind, endangering me and others, I'll confront it and avert it without delay. So if you analyze these words, the assumption here, it seems to me, is this person who's talking, Langri Tangpa, who must be highly realized because this is his words. The assumption is that, you know, virtues are usually in your mind, and then a little delusion will pop in. Well, for us, it's the other way around. The delusions are the default mode. Attachment, fears, jealousy, confusion, are in the mind all the time. So this is already implying a highly advanced person because they're watching their mind like a hawk. They're brilliant. They've got concentration, probably shamatha. They can see every tiny thought. And the second a moment of attachment or aversion or jealousy or upset or arrogance pops in, they instantly grab it, because they're so full of compassion, they don't want it to hurt others as well as themselves, and they will argue with it and then avert it. That's being your own therapist. That's the job of being a Buddhist. That's the actual central job of being a Buddhist. And or you can see it's advanced. You need decent concentration. You have to have the Buddhist model of the mind down. You've got a lot. This is really what the day-to-day job. That's the wisdom wing every second, every single second. Now, these next three, I think we'll stop now. We'll continue on. Now I have some questions, okay? Let's have some questions now. Gosh, it's a long time I've been talking. I'm so sorry. Now we have some questions. Come on, Charlotte. What's your questions?
Okay. Yeah. So I'll be brief. So you said that attachment is the root of all suffering. So clearly it's horrible in the Buddhist context.
That's right.
But in the Western psychology context,
Yeah.
Attachment, the word attachment
Yes.
is essential, right?
That's-
if you're positively attached.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yes. Can you resolve that for me?
I
Because
will certainly. I will do that. Basically, it's a different. In other words, it's a different definition, and we know that in English language. You know, I always think when I lived in London, Australia, we lived in a flat. Now, of course, we all live in apartments now because we're all Americanized. But I'd live in a flat. Now, if you'd never heard, but we also know that flat is geometry, isn't it? Something is flat. But we know it's the same word, same spelling, same pronunciation. But because we're so used to these different words, we see the context and we'll understand it. Well, it's as simple as that, Charlotte. Attachment, the way Buddha uses the word, it's not the same, it's a different definition. It's a completely different definition. So don't think it's the same attachment that we use, because then, of course, we'll be very depressed, because as Lama Zopa says, when we hear the Buddha says we've got to give up attachment, because of our definition of it, it's a different state of mind. We go, oh, I've got to give up my heart, I've got to give up my happiness. And that's the biggest problem for us, because we use the word in a completely different way. So the Buddha's referring to, and this is where, again, like I mentioned in passing, but I'll be specific now for you, that Buddhist model of the mind it's been around before. The Indians before him were the ones who mapped the mind internally. That the contents of our mind, you know, the thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions, they've mapped the mind. This is like 3,000 years ago. And they're dividing very clearly every single tiny one of our thoughts and feelings and emotions into precisely three categories. This is a technical thing. Those that are neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, you know, disturbing, delusional. They lead us up garden paths. They are in their nature suffering, and they cause suffering, and they're misconceptions in the depth of our being. And as far as Buddha is concerned, these are the cause of all suffering. Then you've got the next category of states of mind, which are our saving grace. They're called the positive or the valid or the virtuous states of mind, which are not neurotic, are not I-based, are not delusional, but have a validity. And this is a curious way to talk, because in modern psychology, we don't divide them into valid and non-valid. They're all just states of mind, right? We give them equal status. But for the Buddha, there are these two clear distinctions. And so the job of being a Buddhist is to become intimately familiar with the delusions and lessen them. Why? First, because you're sick of suffering, and then eventually because they separate you from others. And two, to grow to this limitless degree, love, wisdom, compassion, kindness, self-confidence, generosity, all the positive qualities. So there's this crucial difference. We hear these words, but it seems odd to us because it sounds like judgmental and moralistic, you know? So the third category of states of mind, I like to call them the mechanics of our mind. These are neither virtuous or positive or useful in it. They're not. Okay, there's a specific meaning here of virtue. It means it's a positive quality that relates to others, like love and compassion and generosity. The negative ones are I-based, anger, depression, anxiety, jealousy, low self-esteem, attachment. And the root one, ego grasping, which is the one we have to get rid of eventually. So then we have to learn to discriminate between these. But the parts of our mind that help us do that, these mechanics of our mind, they're like concentration, good memory, discrimination. They develop, we need to develop those. So there's these three categories of states of mind. But the two ones we're discussing here are the neurotic, deluded, ridiculous ones, which are completely I-based, that make us totally self-centered, totally distressed. They're the basis of any suffering we have at all and why we harm others. And then the positive, valid, useful ones. That's the major distinction. So attachment, I mean, Buddha talks about 84,000 different states of mind, neurotic ones, but he subsumes them all down to three. They call them the three poisons in Buddhism, these three toxic emotions. And on the face of it, they sound kind of cute. Ignorance is the main one, which is this one that assumes a separate sense of self, which is really very subtle. On the basis of this misconception of a neurotic, fear-based sense of I, we then have this primordial emotional hunger to get what that I wants. And that's this disease called attachment. It's so pervasive and so natural and so normal for us, we even conflate it with love and kindness, you know? So the Buddha says we have to isolate this and observe it and see how it's the cause of all suffering. And it blinds us. So, you know, it's just huge. In other words, if you had mainly attachment for your boyfriend, let's say, or your husband, whoever it is, or your child, but not much love, you'd end up killing them, because attachment is just totally self-centered. But our love redeems us. Our love comes along with attachment. And that's why it's kind of hard to even notice attachment, because we conflate it with love. Love is a valid, appropriate, spacious state of mind that delights in someone else's happiness. Attachment is I-based, fear-based, and desperate and hungry. Now, how does that help? Does that help a bit?
That helps. Thanks. Yeah, it's mainly the difference between that. Like, it sounds like Buddhism doesn't have anything against the Western psychology version of attachment. It's not considered as
you bond with the person, you're close to them. That's perfect. It's called love and compassion. But the Buddhist analysis of it, Charlotte, the Buddhist analysis of it probably would be that there is what Buddhism calls the self-centered neurotic emotional hunger mixed in with that love and kindness, but we don't distinguish it like that in the West.
Okay, thank you.
Look, in other words, look at the neurotic mother. We talk about the neurotic mums. Our mums are all love us, adore us, totally adore us, and they're totally attached to us. So the negative part of attachment from the Buddhist perspective, if you think of a mother like this, we all recognize it. They'd be manipulative, possessive, dominating, bossy, control freaks. That's what Buddhism refers to as the neurotic attachment, those aspects. Do you understand?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Charlotte. It's a tricky one because the word, we hear it and we can so misunderstand what Buddha's saying. We've got to be so careful about it. Otherwise, we chuck the baby out with the bathwater, you know. No, I mean, the fact is, when you've got love and compassion, you would have incredible, if you were a mother who had love and compassion, not much attachment, you'd be a radiantly marvelous mother, totally bonded, totally gorgeous, totally wise. You know, you'd be extraordinary mother. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And that's where, Charlotte, unfortunately, in the West, when we misread these words, many people then end up thinking they're giving up attachment, but they become like nihilistic. They become kind of indifferent. This is the worst understanding possible. That's just horrible. It's nothing to do with it. So it's more nuanced than we think, you know. Thank you. It's a really good point. Thanks. What other questions, people? Any other questions?
Robina, so this is to work on being a bodhisattva, but what if you have the low self-esteem? What do you work on then? Because
that's the earlier stages of practice. That means, you know, giving up. You see, when when we analyze, the first stages of practice are mainly to put ourselves together, you know, not to, in other words, if I'm in a relationship with my boyfriend and I'm overwhelmed by jealousy and anger and fears, and I'm obsessed and angry about him and criticize him all the time, if I go to my therapist, even any decent therapist would help me learn to forget about the boyfriend. Let's look at my mind. What's your problem, Robina? And I've got to look into what it is about. Why have I got these expectations? Why do I get jealous so easily? In other words, stop endlessly talking about the boyfriend. Talk about myself, unpack and unravel my jealousy, my fears, my low self-esteem, and analyze those. That's exactly the same in the Buddhist practice. This has got nothing to do with being kind to the boyfriend. Leave the boyfriend alone. And if he is too heavy, get the hell out of his way. You know, if I go to my therapist and she's a Buddhist and she says, well, you've got to see yourself as the lowest of all, Robina, she's giving me grade 12 practice. I'm not even in grade 1 yet. So the practice is the first level. No, control my body and speech, and then begin to be my own therapist, begin to bit of meditation, and then learn Buddhist model of the mind and identify what's called attachment, which is this bottomless pit of emotional hunger to get what I want all the time. That's why I get angry. That's why I'm offended easily. As soon as he looks at another girl, I take it as a personal insult to me. That's how the delusions make us feel, totally self-centered. But we don't like saying like that because it sounds mean, you know. So you learn to look at all these delusions and you begin to lessen your anger, lessen your jealousy, lessen your attachment. This is heavy duty practice. This is intense. And then you become more, you've got more equilibrium, you become more steady. Then I can start to see past my own nose and actually stop taking everything my boyfriend does personally and start to see him from his point of view. I mean, what a revelation. And then I'll be able to see him more clearly. And then I'll realize, well, this is not a useful relationship. I'm sitting here like an idiot, you know, taking his abuse, like I'm thinking I'm so special, but I'm thinking I'm so holy. I'm not. I should get the hell out of his way. That's my practice at that stage. Leave the job if I can't handle the boss. Leave the job if I can't handle the colleagues. But we're so hopeless. We can't even make those decisions. Then I can begin to really practice love and compassion. Are you with me?
yes. I'm thinking there's more of a middle ground where you're taking care of yourself and also the other, right? But this thing
I
of
know, but that's just a way of, I'm not talking, no, I'm not discussing it like that here. Of course, but what I'm meaning is you've got to do the inner work. You can't just all the time be on the middle ground. You've got to have some time and space for your own inner work. That's why people go to therapists. You don't bring your bloody husband to your therapist. You do your own inner work and do your weeping and crying about yourself to your therapist, so you then can go back and be kind to your husband. Yes, that's when you practice the compassion wing. Yes.
got it.
You see my point?
Okay. Yep.
Good. Who else? Questions? What else? People? Except the Buddhist way of doing the going off to the therapist is you give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, become a monk or nun, and go to the mountains for 10 years. So you do it quickly. Then you can come down the mountain and be kind to others. So you just whiz through it much more quickly. But that's not what most of us are going to do. We're going to do it in the middle of the relationship, which I think is much harder, actually. It's not a bit like trying to become like Roger. Yes, coming. It's a bit like becoming like trying to be like Roger Federer by just practicing in the morning. You've got to give up everything to become like Roger Federer. That's like the yogis are like that. And they can come down and be the best tennis player or the most compassionate person. But each one of us is not going to do that. Yes, Wolfgang, what's your question?
Venerable Robina, do you know if there are suffering beings in the Amitabha Pure Land?
Wolfgang is so funny. No, darling, there aren't. There can't be. Not
So,
possible.
so then it would not be the right land for bodhisattvas.
No, the reason you go there is because you're going to have a subtle light body, you'll be surrounded by the Buddhas, you get teachings 24 hours a day. So you'll whiz through your realizations really, really quickly without hindrances. And then you can come back and be bodhisattva to the other humans on the planet. That's the only reason you go there.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's the reason. Okay.
Yeah, it's not for practicing. They cannot practice there.
Huh?
The bodhisattvas could not practice there.
In that sense, no. But they'd get but you don't see. That's also okay, because even the bodhisattvas, when they're in their meditation, they're on their own in their meditation, meditating on all of this, changing their minds. So then when they do go down to the city, they're totally qualified. So it's a similar thing, except in the Pure Lands, you get realization, you can realize emptiness very quickly. And then when you've done that and achieved bodhicitta there, super quick, because there's no hindrances, then you can come. And the same with the yogis, just the same level. A yogi will go to the mountains for a couple of years and get realizations very quickly. But they'll also get compassion because they've thought of it. They've really practiced it. But then okay. In the Bodhisattva path, the first stages, which we're discussing now, is these stages of working on your mind and achieving bodhicitta, making this paradigm shift. Once you get to that level, the next level of practice, which we're going to talk about next week, is now you do the next stages of practice, which is you're going to perfect the path from life after life after life, bopping around right in the face of sentient beings for many, many lifetimes. That's where you do your real heavy duty perfecting of the compassion wing, where you practice the 6 perfections. But if you go to like you can go to retreat, you can get ahead of the game very quickly, and then you can come to help others. You can go to the Pure Land and get even more quickly and then come and help others. It's just a question of degree.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, somebody else.
So if others don't have a question, I have another question, but I want to let others.
Yes, darling.
So psychedelics, do you have any thoughts on psychedelics? You've mentioned a couple times people going to the mountains and getting things done really quickly.
I know. Yes,
And
absolutely. I've got lots of personal experience. When I was back in my 20s and early 20s, actually, mainly 20s and early 30s, I was completely into, I mean, not that many psychedelics, but, so I like LSD, but mainly marijuana was my drug of choice. So I can say this one, for sure, it helped me really radically see things in a different way. It was very helpful, extremely helpful. In terms of blissful experiences or special experiences, I don't think I had many high realizations, but because it kind of altered my mind, you're able to see things in a fresh way, which can only be good. But the Buddhist approach is, you can only go so far with any external stimulus. It can help your mind. Anything can help your mind. But because the Buddhist view about the mind is that we've got these much subtler levels of mind that we don't even posit as existing in the modern world. And this is discussed by the Indians well before the Buddha even. And they're the ones who created this amazing technique that the world knows vaguely as mindfulness. But actually it's just this really sophisticated level of a sophisticated psychological skill that's actually called single-pointed concentration. and one learns to, this is in meditation, you can only do it when you're kind of out of the way. You learn to get total and effortless control over the grosser level of mind, and eventually you completely subdue the conceptuality and the sensory level of consciousness, which is all we posit in the modern world and in neuroscience, and we access these subtle levels of our mind. So this is this is where your mind is super powerful, super incredible, super radiant, super clear, super blissful. And so drugs and psychedelics and any sensory thing from the Buddhist perspective is at a very gross level. It can be useful, but in the end, to get this single point of concentration, you need incredible discipline, incredible ethics, incredible subdued mind. You've got to give up attachment to most things in order to get past the usual one of the mind, the usual junk, So it's a much more sophisticated, subtle level of mind, and psychedelics has got zero to do with that. In fact, it would be a hindrance.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Charlotte. Nevertheless, I thoroughly enjoyed them, and I learned a few things. Who else?
I have a question about drugs. So I was on antidepressants, and I was trying to wean off of it. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Not now, though.
Okay. Sorry, my internet.
I know,
my connection is pretty bad.
No, just keep talking. I'll try and hear you go.
Okay. I was on antidepressants, and then with studying Buddhism and meditation, I was able to wean off of it. But I just noticed it's like, my angry thoughts are just too powerful. So I went back on the medication because I was just having stress. So if I'm unable to get off antidepressants, I mean, in other words, it's like, I can't, it's really hard for me to practice Dharma without them. Is that?
The broader point is this: we have to be intelligent and be self-respectful and find out what tools we need in this life to help us know our mind, control, get some ethics, understand our body, speech, and mind, and be in charge of our lives. So whatever helps you do that, honey child, you use your common sense and you do it. Now, if you discover there's a downside to that tool that you use that becomes bigger and bigger, then you've got to make a choice. That's my general answer. Use your own wisdom, Spito. There's no law in Buddhism that says you mustn't have a thing called a drug. I was answering Charlotte's particular point in terms of you don't, eventually when you really access your mind at a subtler level, it's irrelevant to have any kind of, you don't need even that level of food or alcohol or drugs or other people. Your mind is so marvelous, so brilliant. So we're all aiming for that, Vanessa. But when on our method of getting there, we need to use certain tools. We've got to, be healthy, eat good food. And if you have to take your Prozac or whatever it is, because it helps you stay steady, then go for it, baby. But you've got to be your own policeman, your own doctor. You've got to observe the effect on your mind. And if it ends up you become addicted to some drug, what's the point of that? You just make it more trouble. So you've got to be in charge of your own self and do what you can. And so if anything that you take, a drug that you take, helps you see your mind better, then honey child, go for it. But you've got to be very sensible about it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, thank you.
Good, Vanessa.
Vanessa, hi. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I've taken supplements instead of antidepressants, and I've found some of that stuff could be helpful, like St. John's wort and SAMI and ashwagandha, and what else? Oh, there was one other, now I can't remember. But there are stuff, if you want to research, there's stuff out there that you can use that you might be helpful.
Good. Yes, Dana. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Yeah, thank you, Venerable Robina.
Kind of you. Thanks, Kim. Good suggestion. Go on. Go, Dana.
Yeah. This is really just my curiosity. You piqued my curiosity when you were talking about the yogis who go to the mountains for 10 years and get their realizations, and they come back and they practice bodhicitta. And I'm curious because we've just talked about the 8 verses which really focus on benefiting others and how we grow from benefiting others. And I'm curious, when they're up in the mountains for 10 years and they're not around other sentient beings, how are they benefiting from
I
others?
understand. Exactly, I understand. Okay. See, that's what I think points out that we just can't comprehend what a person does do in the mountains for 10 years. So,
Mhm.
but if I tell you that if you know, like the example of becoming a doctor, if you're sitting there at university for 7 years with your nose in books the whole time, studying and discussing with other people, it's like I'm saying to you, what are you doing? How come you're not helping others? But what will you say? But I'm training myself to help others. Won't you say that? That's what a bodhisattva's do. There's so much work you've got to do. You see, I'll tell the story about Harry. It's always an example I use about this one, exchanging self for others, giving yourself, putting others first. So I tell the story all the time. He's one time he was up in he was in Kopan Monastery in the 90s, before mobiles anyway, before cell phones. And he was getting ready to go up to his cave. He has a cave up in Solukhumbu, where Lama Zopa's got a cave. And he's up there, he's been up there he's now down, and he's in Colorado now, just up the road from me. So anyway, he was getting ready to go to meditate up in his cave, and he left. And then Lama Zopa, who was there, said he had a dream that Harry would die and to send and get a message not to go, but it was too late. So anyway, Lama Zopa asked Geshe Lama Kontrog, one of these amazing lamas of ours, who had spent years and years and years up in the cave, naked, no food, no sleep, meditating day and night, doing this work, which we find a bit abstract. It's hard for us to understand what a yogi's doing all those years. That's why your question, I understand that point. So anyway, so the story goes, I heard this story, and then I saw Harry and I asked him to please verify the story. So this is what happened. His usual route had been kind of blocked, so he had to take this other route, which is extremely dangerous. And up in those mountains, it's really quite treacherous. You know, people fall off the rocks or fall off the mountains all the time. So these porters up there, they're incredible. These guys, they carry 40, 60, 50 kilos on their back, and they bent double with this big strap on their forehead, and they're bent double holding these massive packs, walking up and down these treacherous paths. Often they fall over too. So anyway, he's walking up this really narrow, treacherous, with a big 1,000-foot drop on the left and the mountain on the right, very narrow, very treacherous. And suddenly 4 Sherpas are coming, 4 porters right in front of him, down the mountain, really intense. And it's so dangerous. So he's been meditating for years. This is my point now. So then the first thought he had was, he said, oh, 4 of them, 1 of me, okay, I'll step to the side. Now that is a bizarre concept. There's all these, which I haven't talked about in these 11 techniques, but all these methods of gradually trying to put others first, you're using logic to smash ego's view. As far as we're concerned, I'm more important because I'm me. So a normal person would put themselves up against the cliff and hope the poor porters don't fall over the cliff. And if they do, it's not my fault. I mean, I'm sort of talking roughly, but if it's your children, you might stand to the side. But automatically, from his years of practice, he's been practicing ripping out delusions from his mind. That takes intense hard work year after year to radically reconfigure your thoughts and emotions to make them truly not just not a moment of compassion, but actually continuously a genuine realization of putting others first, believing others are more important. You can't just feel it every now and again. You've got to train for years in it. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is the proof of the pudding. So he stepped on the edge of the cliff, and then they get it, and it was almost like in a minute, it was so close. Then he said to himself, if they knock me, I won't hold on. So they knocked him. They didn't mean to. And he doesn't hold on. So he's got his pack on his back, his feet are on the ground, and he starts falling backwards. He said, I had a psychic vision of the entire fall. I saw my body crash to the ground. And then he felt the hands of Geshe Lama Kontrog forcefully pushing him. So he reversed direction and fell into the path. So there's a whole bunch of things in there, but forget the magic of Geshe Lama Kontrog. I mean, that's what Buddhas are capable, that's what high beings are capable of, but forget that one. But just the fact that Harry, there's no way an ordinary person with ordinary instinct of eye, ordinary feelings would automatically do that unless there's something. Do you understand what I'm saying? That you can only do after, in other words, if you haven't trained for years to be a surgeon, suddenly a disaster arises, you wouldn't know what to do. You have to train by studying and practicing and practicing. That's exactly what yogis are doing in the mountains. And that's what we're trying to do a little bit every day. You with me?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Someone else? No one else. Okay, I'll keep going. I'll go through these verses. These get worse by the minute. These next 3 are dreadful. Each one is worse than the next. And the feeling I've got, this next one is sort of like
seeing the world out there. It's not too close to home yet, but you hear it. And remember, this is written in like 10th century Tibet. Whenever I see, I'm going to put in natural words, that speak so strange. When it says people who are wicked in nature. Well, what is the term we would use in our culture? I'd suggest we say psychopaths. It's a good term. We all get it. I'm not sure we know the definition of who first invented it, but we all know it means a really wacky, dreadful person. Okay. So whenever it says see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by violent, negative actions, and suffering, we would never think a psychopath suffers. We wouldn't like to think that, because as soon as we think a person's suffering, you think you got to feel sorry for them, and we don't want to do that. But this is the point here. Of course, a person's suffering. If you're a psychopath, if you're just angry, you are suffering. Forget about being a psychopath. If you've got attachment, you are suffering. But our trouble is, because as soon as we see people who are horrible, we do not want to think they're suffering. We want to think they're evil from head to toe, and they should go to hell or be locked in prison. We love to hate awful people, you know. So it's not comfortable for us to think of them as suffering. This is a major point, but this is the Buddhist whole point. And this is why, before I get back to this real point, when you do the first work on your own mind, you know, when you're like talking, you know, Wendy's point, when you go to your therapist and see your own misery and you see your own pain, you know, your anger, your fears, your low self-esteem, you've got to start to taste your own pain. You've got to be sick of this pain, but not blame your boyfriend for it. The Buddha's view is you've got the pain because of your attachment, because of your low self-esteem, because of your jealousy. And when you start to see that and you know you own those, then you will have compassion for yourself and you'll realize you are suffering. So the same, then when you look at other people, you go, oh my God, look at that. They must be suffering too. So it's a very different view about people who are suffering. So anyway, here, the point is this. Whenever I, you know, read about, see, hear, meet, talk about psychopaths, using our words, who are people who are overwhelmed by violent negative actions, and they are suffering, how will you feel about them? I will hold them as dear, as if I'd found a precious treasure. So again, what precisely is that practice? The whole point in all these verses, the whole point in this entire level of practice is we want to smash our own self-cherishing. We want to smash our own attachment, smash our own anger, not for any kind of mean reason, but because they are what are holding me back. They are what are causing me suffering, and they are holding me back from being a compassionate person to others. Because the wish here is to develop this amazing skill to be full of compassion and love for others. So clearly, it's a bit like, you know, Wolfgang's being the doctor, and he's testing himself to the limit. So whenever he gets into that tent on the war zone, and he will run straight. So what will he do with those really difficult ones, those legs coming off, the people screaming in agony? Because he wants to be the best doctor. He will run to them like a magnet, and he will see these people as the most precious treasure for him, because it's giving him the opportunity to push himself to become the best doctor. That's what this means. So in other words, the best, if you see you've got anger and attachment and fears and jealousy, and we're talking at an advanced level here, because you really want to try and have compassion for others, they're what holding you back. They are what hold you back. So the quickest way to get rid of attachment, the quickest way to get rid of anger, is to have a person who attacks it. So seeing a person who's a monster, who's gross and who's suffering and who's harming others, and have compassion for them, this is profound, you know. I'll see as if I found a precious treasure. Because it will just, otherwise you just fall into the complacency of feeling, you know, just your normal self. You've got to push. It's like going to the gym. You've got to force yourself beyond the comfort zone. You're happy if you have to go uphill. You're happy if you have to stress yourself and push on that bike or on the treadmill, and the sweat comes. You are so happy to do that because you're forcing yourself, you're pushing yourself beyond your limit. That's what we're discussing here. You're forcing yourself beyond your limit of typical ego in order to develop compassion. Now, the next verse, it gets a bit closer to home. That's sort of out there in the world, I'd say. This gets a bit closer to home. And my sense, this is a bit sort of like as if it's at work. Think about it. When out of envy, others mistreat me with abuse, insults, or the like. Well, look what happened. Look at work. Work is a profound place of so much pain and suffering and happiness for many people. You get people start turning against you. They get jealous of you. Your colleagues start criticizing you. Then or you get demoted or you get fired. I mean, we nearly go mad with this kind of suffering. It's so painful for us, you know. I will accept the defeat and offer the victory to them. This is insane, right? The first instinct we have with normal ego, normal attachment, normal anger, normal low self-esteem, because we have this attachment, I haven't begun to talk about this, I think next week we better go into more detail on this one. The deepest, most primordial level of attachment that we've all got, it's really only discussed in the Bodhisattva wing. More than for sex, drugs, rock and roll, money, anything. The deepest, most primordial attachment, closest to the ego grasping, the root delusion, is this hunger to be seen and approved of by others. So when we're insulted, when someone hurts us, when someone criticizes, it is just panic attack of pain, isn't it? We can't believe they don't believe what we said. They can't believe that they think we did that thing. It is like a nightmare for us. Even if someone just accuses us of speaking too loudly and we didn't, we get so hurt. So the first thing is to defend ourselves, to prove that we didn't do it or that we're not like that. It's so painful. So here we're trying to smash delusions, remember? So then you'll accept the defeat and offer the victory to them. This is too much for our mind. Or every one of us probably thinking, don't be ridiculous. No, it's not possible. That's mentally ill. That's not healthy. You've got to defend yourself. That's how we talk. Now, Wendy's point, if I'm still at the first level and haven't done any practice and my boyfriend yet again accuses me of doing the wrong thing, this is not my practice. I've got to learn to be brave and to stand up. Excuse me, mate. That's where we've got to know where we are at. We've got to know what level of practice we can do. But if you have no choice sometimes, this is a very powerful practice. When you know you cannot get those people at work to believe you, so then it's a very powerful practice. This is why I always use examples, as you know, from my friends in prison. So especially when you've got people in prison, and there's so many in this country who have been wrongly accused, you know, because the system is so corrupt with respect. That's my experience. So I always quote that one woman, Sunny. She's out of prison now. She's an old lady. She lives in Ireland, and she was in prison in Florida for 17 years, wrongly accused with her husband at the time of killing 2 policemen. So it's like the worst nightmare in the universe. Just being accused of saying the wrong word is bad enough. Being accused of killing 2 policemen and you're on death row. I mean, you can't even conceive of the nightmare. Most people go mad. She wasn't even a Buddhist. She did yoga and things. I mean, I know the woman. She helps people now who've been wrongly accused. She's amazing. But she talked about how she was in solitary for years. And she said the methods you used, she said, I knew, because she said, I had no choice. I could not change anything. This was so powerful. She was in this small cell in this nightmarish environment. Even her husband had been executed, and she went to the execution, and his head burst into flames. You can't even imagine worse nightmares, you know. And she was completely this hippie, for God's sake, totally innocent. So she said, I knew I couldn't change anything. It was crystal clear. But she said, they can't take my mind from me. I mean, this is the essence of every single thing we're saying here. This is the essence of the entirety of Buddha's path, you know. This is the precise point that Buddha is making from A to Z. But she wasn't a Buddhist. She just had this intelligence. She had this, I would suggest, incredible emotional intelligence. She could see that the reality was she was absolutely, her back was against the wall. There was nothing she could do to get people to believe her. The judge, the jury, the police, everybody. She was on death row. There was nothing she could do. But she knew she could change her mind. She said, I knew I could choose to think differently. I mean, this is so stupendous. It's just, to me, such an unbelievable quality, this woman, you know. So the 17 years she was there, and this is what's interesting. The whole point of this is this. The simplest point is this, but without even having compassion. The simple point about this is she kept her sanity. She kept her humor. She became more compassionate. She became more wise. She became more powerful. She became more self-confident. She became more reasonable. And by the time she continued to work the whole time on her freedom, and she got out of prison eventually. Now she's helping other people. Now, if she had been like what we call normal and just gone completely crazy, like one guy I read about who went out of his brain screaming daily, I did not rape and kill that woman. He went mad. Now, we, in our view, think that's just natural. Well, yeah, but she realized they can't take my mind from me. That's incredible. So what's the consequence of that? Forget the compassion one. The consequence was she kept sanity. She kept happy, and she kept her wits about her, so she continued to work on her freedom. But if you lose your brain, go out of your brain, because you don't think you can change your mind, then you can do nothing. Your hands are tied. So when we look at the practical benefit, this is just the wisdom wing, forget the compassion wing. This seems so heavy for us in our culture. It's not passivity. It is the opposite of passivity. It's profound, proactive action, you know. She took control of her own mind. She knew she could change her way to think. She knew she could choose, she said. So she became a happy person and wise and kind to others. She taught yoga in prison, eventually, all these things. And then eventually she got her freedom and got out, you know. That's incredible. In other words, the Buddha's simple point is, even for your own benefit, you change your mind. For your own benefit, you give up anger and jealousy and depression. For your own benefit, you grow wisdom and clarity and kindness and self-confidence, because you're the beneficiary. Forget about the benefit to others. This is already what's so stupendous, you know, but we hear it as moralistic. We hear it as you're supposed to be passive and put up with the misery. No, that's nihilism. That's hideous. But this one is again is a method of completely destroying this instinct to put me first, this instinct to rise up with a panic attack of ego, you know, because you're trying to smash ego. Because when you smash ego, you become more happy and you're more connected to others. This is the Buddha's analysis, you know. This next one is even more intense. It's like your husband or your child. I think this is really close to home, this next one. When someone whom I benefited and to whom I have, you know, in other words, it sounds like a child, you know, somebody you've loved, adored, whom you have great hopes in, they give me terrible harm. That's the thing that breaks my heart when I have so many parents come, mothers or parents come, and they say their child has rejected them, you know. I mean, it's unbearable. It's just the most unbearable pain. I can't imagine it, you know. When the child completely gives up on the parent, hates them, blames them, rejects them. Unbearable. Unbearable. I regard that person as my holy guru. So clearly these are advanced practices. They almost seem so crazy, you know. The words are so simple. We read about emptiness and dependent arising, which we'll do. You think, oh, that sounds difficult. Oh, that sounds all these intellectual ideas. This just sounds cute and simple. But it's like you've got to have some reference point to even grab hold of this stuff, you know. Otherwise, it's insane. Time to go home. Look, my God. 2 hours go so quick. So any more questions before we finish? Anyway, these verses are in your course notes, so you can read them over between now and next week and contemplate the meaning and even try to think them. Try and do them, even once. Oh, let me tell you a story. I've got to finish with the story. This is lovely. I love this story. I told it 1,000 times. I've heard it about 30 years ago. And it's about giving the victory, taking the blame. There's this fellow in Sydney, a Buddhist, John, and he's having a party. One of my friends was there. And he was telling everybody how his brand new BMW had been scratched right along the door. So he bought a new door. Then it got scratched again. He thought, what's going on? You know, I think it like happened 3 times. And he said, what'll I do? Well, you know, somebody said, well, scratch his door. You know, he discovered it was the fellow next door, this old bloke next door. He had no idea why he was doing it. He didn't know what he was supposed to have done wrong. You know, he can't think of anything he's done wrong. But he said, what am I going to do? So anyway, my friend George was at the party and he's a Buddhist. And he said, I'll tell you what Lama Zopa would do. He would discover what this old bloke likes, and then he would buy him a very beautiful, fancy gift, and he would offer him the gift, and he would apologize for whatever he's done wrong. So John, even though he's done nothing wrong, he thought, what a good idea. So he found out this old bloke liked golf. So he bought him these fancy golf balls and went to the back door and knocked on the door, and the old guy was gobsmacked, you know, and took this gift. And then John's in the kitchen feeling good about all this, having a cup of tea. And the old bloke comes in, smiling from ear to ear with his gift unwrapped. And he said, this is the kindest thing anyone has done. He said, everything is forgiven. So I think I love that story. I was just reading now in the New York Times, and you read this so often. These two mega rich people in, where is it? No, Laguna Beach. In Laguna Beach, two mega rich guys. That's all. The conflict started 20 years ago when one of them put up some fence that prevented him from seeing the sea. So they started to argue. Then they now both in court, millions of dollars, they're never giving up. They're accusing, they're getting to the point of insanity, going completely mad. But look at this one. John took the victory. I mean, it's a brand new BMW, probably cost him a couple of $1,000s. It could have escalated over years into nightmares. This is so often what happens. That's how conflicts start, isn't it? When you won't give in, you don't give up. That's how fights with people, that's how divorces happen, you know. But to give the victory, again, Wendy, if you're in this relationship and you're this little weak person, fearful, a victim, low self-esteem, and having this person who brutalizes you every day, oh, he really does love me, and he punches you in the nose again. That's not this. That's pathetic. That's wrong. That's low. That's completely the wrong view. But if you can't hear, if you're still at that level and you hear this, you'll become like a doormat. This is not practice. This is a profound practice if you're a suitable vessel, that you've done the work on your mind. In other words, it implies the only person who's capable of this is a person with incredible confidence, incredible humility, incredible understanding of their mind. That person is the one who's really capable of this, you know. It's an advanced level of practice. So there's some food for thought, you people. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, people. Thank you, Charlotte, for your questions, darling. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, whoever's there. Who else is there? Let me see you all. There's David. Oh, don't wait. I want to see people. Can I see people first, Andrew? I want to see people. That's all. Mary, Andrew, Tara, Vanessa, Wendy, Kristen, Kim, David. There's more. Next page. Who's there? Eric. Hello, Eric. People pop up on new pages. Betty's there. Hello, Betty. How are you, darling? You doing well? Good, Betty. Betty's an old friend. We've known each other about 30 years. There's Lauren in Los Angeles. There's Elsa. Carly, there's Carly. Hello, darling. Eve, Denise. I'm happy to see you all. Carol and Trudy. And Leanne. Good. Much love, everybody. So now we can do our little prayers to finish. Okay, so dedication. Dedication means, okay, in the beginning we motivated. That's how they call it. So it's sort of like you're going outside to dig your garden. So you motivate. You think, why am I digging this garden? So I can grow a beautiful garden of veggies and fruits and herbs so I can offer it all to sentient beings. That's why I'm doing it. That's your motivation, your altruistic motivation. Then at the end of it, you've done all your gardening. And then you think, what? So you dedicate and you think, well, why did I grow this garden? Well, I grew it so I could, when all the veggies come, I'm going to offer them all to sentient beings. That's motivation. That's dedication. So why have we done this job of listening to these teachings? So we can become an amazing being in the future to help everybody. Now we dedicate to the end. Remember why we did it. So we can become a Buddha, so we can benefit all sentient beings. So we're dedicating all of this work we've done. We're going to give all the results of all this work, all our veggies, to sentient beings. That's dedication. That maybe makes it more complicated, but it was meant to make it more easy. I'm sorry. Due to the merits, due to the virtuous karma, due to the positive karma of this action of listening to these teachings, because every thought goes in, every thought we have sows seeds, nothing goes astray. May I quickly attain the state of an enlightened being so that I can lead all living beings without exception into that state. And may this marvelous bodhicitta, this aspiration to be of benefit to others, to never give up. May this supreme jewel bodhicitta that hasn't arisen in the minds of others arise and grow, and may that which has arisen, may it not diminish, but increase more and more. That's it. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
See you all next week, all being well. Okay, we'll see you next week.
Thank you,
Bye,
Robina.
love. Thanks, sweetheart.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Night, Robina.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you,
Good
Anne.
seeing everyone.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robina.
Thanks, Robina.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week, hopefully.
Thank you, Andrew. Bye-bye.